Jesse Chason with Lisa Blanchard as the host of Airing Addiction.
I share often my journey started on this campus. Got sober as a client here, just like you.
I really do see phenomenal change.
Always hope. I've seen situations that on the surface look impossible become possible.
Doing this podcast is to share those recovery stories, be honest about what the challenges are and have some real conversations, but kind of share that out on the airwaves.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Airing Addiction. Thank you so much for tuning in live, listening to this later today, or however you're consuming the podcast. My name is Jesse. I'm one of the co-hosts. I'm so glad that you're here. Happy summer. If you're listening live, this is the second day of summer. Happy Pride Month. I know we'll get into that in our episode today and all the various events that not only Spectrum Health Systems has put on, but also across the country and across the world. So glad that you could be with us this morning. I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to introduce our awesome guest today. Morning, Lisa.
Morning, Jesse. Thanks so much. So I'm really excited to be here. This is the Pride Month episode we do for Airing Addiction is always one of my favorite conversations, and I'm really excited for the conversation today. I think it's got some really great history, some great kind of transformation over time of how we support the LGBTQ plus community, and I'm really excited to do a brief introduction for Rebecca Capri Durkee. And it's only brief because the whole introduction could take the whole podcast with everything that Rebecca has accomplished over many years. And so Rebecca founded the Gender Identity Support Services for Transgenders, GISST, in Boston, Massachusetts. So right in our backyard in 1994. She drew hundreds of community members and providers together for events calling for a day of remembrance. She's a recipient of the AIDS Action Community Recognition Award and a member of the Massachusetts Prevention Planning Group. That is like the super abbreviated version of all the fantastic things that I hope we get some time to talk about today. But with that, I really want to turn it over to you, Rebecca. And so often when we have someone with lived experience, it's up to you how much you choose to share or not share, but we like to give folks that are listening a little bit of background of who you are, what is your recovery story, how did you get into this recovery space, and then I'd love to talk about all of the fantastic advocacy work that you have been doing. So if you want to share as much of your story as you're comfortable.
Thank you, Lisa, and good morning, Jesse.
Good morning.
I'm Rebecca Durkee. I'm a transgendered woman. I'm 67 years old. And my drinking really started when I was 21. I was a prostitute, and I'm not ashamed of that at all. So in order for me to do what I had to do, I had to drink. I had to be drunk. I had to be, intoxicated somehow by something. And so that's how I really started drinking, and it continued until the 80s, and then I started doing coke, and that was like the popular drug of the 80s, 90s. I don't know about today, but I got sober about 30 years ago, and how I got sober is I went to a women's meeting. I went to AA meetings alone, and people laughed at me. They joked about me because I got up there on podium and told my story, but I did what I had to do to stay sober. I went through the STEER program in Milton, a recovery program for 30 days, and I got out of there, and my sponsor brought me to Plymouth to live with her mother. So I literally had to remove myself, and I just started going to meetings. And then I decided to start a meeting, AA meeting for transgenders. I went back, I got my GED, I went to Newbury College, and I started an AA meeting for transgenders. And then I thought, I was hearing from so many transgenders how there was just nothing there for them, nowhere to go. And it's not a cookie cutter situation. Everybody's recovery is different. Everybody's road to recovery is different. Everybody's approach to it is different. So it would be very easy for me to say, just do what I did, but that they couldn't do. They had to pay rent, they had to make money. And so we started the Gender Identity Support Services for Transgenders at the Beacon Hill Multicultural Psychological Association. They were our umbrella agency. And I just did a lot of work with DPH, and we did the first needs assessment for transgenders. We did conferences to open up the door for providers to serve transgenders, because it was becoming a really hot subject back then too. So we were the only state in Massachusetts, we were the only state in the country to have a program for transgenders, to do a needs assessment for transgenders in HIV and substance abuse. And if you want that, you'll have to call DPH. And then I left the GISST work, and it opened up for other people to do that work, and which is what I wanted. And so a movement happened in Boston that was really good. But then I noticed that it was a lot of male to female to male transgenders. So my question became, well, what are happening to the male to female transgenders? And they're still out there doing that thing. But I noticed that now, Lisa, a lot of transgenders are going to college now. They're treating their lives much better than we did back then. But the big thing is that what services are there for them? And that's what we got to introduce to them still.
So there's still some gaps, right? There's still a
lot of gaps, yeah. As
Went
you
from
know.
nothing to
and
something.
What's going on in these other states with transgenders? A lot of transgenders are going to be coming up here. They're leaving those states and they're coming up here for fair. And we have to be willing to embrace them and welcome them.
Mm-hmm. And that was very interesting to me, Rebecca. And thank you so much for all the work you've done in this field for decades and decades. You know, founding GISST back in 1994, and yeah, I did not know that Massachusetts was the only state, and these services are not widely spread. You know, it's so easy, and I guess this is a good point for anyone listening. Also, you know, you said it, there's no one size fits all cookie cutter solution, right? And so often we can get into that trap almost mentally of just do what I did.
Well, it is a trap, because when I was going to AA, I was still prostituted. I had to pay my rent. I had to make a living. I got jobs. I would get jobs. I would apply for jobs and get the jobs. They would find out what I was and fire me. So there was just nowhere for me to go, nothing for me to do. And so that's when I started doing the GISST work. And I, all through college, I cleaned houses. I did what I had to do to make money, but I didn't prostitute.
And so, you know, what strikes me about that too is that, like, there's already so many barriers to work, right, for being in recovery, whether it's CORI histories or just stigma.
Or another one that has stopped me from a lot of jobs, yeah.
And you have the added unfortunate stigma that still exists against the transgender community, right? So, you know, do you think that that was layered on and that made it even harder for you to find work? So not just
I did get a job in 2001. I got a job in Filene's, Boston. I became the counter manager for a cosmetic line. And from there, but you know, even that, I still had to manipulate, because people were going around saying, that's a guy, that's a guy, that's a guy. So a friend of mine who worked in the store, I said, I want you to start a rumor. I said, I want you to say I'm a sex change. So that way there, if I use the ladies' room, nobody can say anything. So that rumor started, you know what I mean? So I had to manipulate the situation to suit me.
And that at its very core, Rebecca, right, is a survival skill. You talk about these things that
exactly.
You did, you know, like the sex industry, for survival, to pay rent. It wasn't, you know, it was a means to an end. And,
exactly.
You know, something that strikes me about your story already, just jumping into this podcast, is you noticed that there was a need and you helped be part of the solution for that need.
I had a lot of support along the way, Jesse. I had my sponsor. I had a woman who really supported me in Plymouth. I created a little community for myself there, which was kind of a safe haven. And that's when I started all my transgender work. And then after Filene's, when they closed, I worked at Saks. And that was another story. Customers, what is that? This and that. And you have to have thick skin. And now it's not normal, but now you see transgenders working in department stores, but they're not getting the support they deserve in department stores with people that work in the stores that make fun of them. So I don't think management is doing them any favors.
So that's a good question.
I remember when somebody said something to me in an elevator, and I got very upset by it. And my manager said, "Well, what bothered you?" I said, "You don't understand. You could never understand."
Yeah.
So no matter what job I got, no matter where I went, there were these obstacles that I was always having to take care of.
And, a couple of things. One is, that must just be such an added layer to barriers to really keeping and maintaining your recovery, right? Because if you're just constantly, I hear you say, and it breaks my heart, right? Like made fun of, comments in elevators, everywhere you turn, you're being told things that make you feel like you don't belong, or you shouldn't be here, or there's something wrong with you, instead of the welcoming and affirming way that you should be received in all spaces.
Everything was like a secret. When I came here, everybody would look and talk. And thank God I am an extrovert. I am a outwardly person. I'm not shy at all. And I could be a little sarcastic too. And, somebody said something about me to my landlady. She knew somebody who knew my landlady, and said that I was a guy. So I cornered her in the store and I said, "Look, you have something to say, you say it to my face." I had to build this person that I really wasn't, this persona. Not a wall, but a persona. So anybody who bothered me, I would stand up to them. Because I was beaten up, I was ridiculed, everything is growing up. That finally I got the guts when I was working to say, "Fuck you. I have a right to be here just as much as you do. I have a right to earn $1 just as much as you do. I have a right to the pursuit of happiness just as much as you do. So get out of my way."
There you go. And I love that fire, Rebecca. And again, that strikes me as, you saw this barrier, you saw these added barriers. I didn't get that far
to be knocked down. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There you go. So is GISST still going on today? I'd love to hear, what that turned into, or, some of the solution there that you helped.
It kind of fizzled out. It became a program of Beacon Hill Multicultural Psychological Association. I started the program. I brought it there, and because of politics in human services and everything, it got me too nervous, and I just didn't want to get involved in politics, like that incestuous stuff that DPH does, and those big conglomerates. And so I left. I quit, and that's when I went to work in the stores. And after I left Saks, a friend of mine, I worked for Elliott Community Human Services. A friend of mine's the president there, and I got a job doing medical records. And so I was the medical records coordinator, which office work I hate, but I had to do it. And so I worked there, and then I retired in 2018.
Awesome. Well done.
And traveled a little bit.
What is that like now? So traveling, just what is your experience moving through the world now? Is it better? Is it different? Is it a little better and still needs some work? Like, how would you describe
me personally? Are you talking personally?
Yeah.
It's a lot better. It's a lot better, because those little things that bothered me before, that frightened me, don't frighten me anymore. I've learned that I can stand up for myself in a very good way. And if people don't like it, it's just too bad.
Yeah.
I went to Lourdes in France, the south of France, and that's a religious pilgrimage. I'm not a religious person per se, but I am a Catholic. So a lot of substance abusers turn to religion per se, because everywhere else they failed. And so I went to Lourdes, and I had a reawakening there. There were baths you take. The nuns, you put a towel around you, and they put you in a tub and then lift you up. I went to the tub, and something said, "This is not for you, Rebecca. This is not for you." So I went outside, I got dressed, I went outside, and I was crying. I was like, "Can I do anything?" And a voice came to me and said, "You are fine just the way you are. Just as flowers are different, you're different." And wow, did that open up a whole new world for me.
That's self-love at its core. That's self-acceptance. That's being, and as someone in recovery, like we were sharing before we hit record on this podcast, one of the greatest gifts I have today is being comfortable in my own skin. I don't have to be somebody else. I can be me. And that
takes work, doesn't it?
Good enough. Of course it does. Because you come in and you hear things about, if you live for people's acceptance, you'll die from their rejection. So if I'm looking for your acceptance in life, we were just talking about this in a group just the other day here at Detox. As an addict, we're just hardwired. Some believe that, we look toward the negative of something, and 100 people can say, "Hey, nice tie." And one person says, "I don't really like that tie." And you forget the 100 people that like it, and you go right to, what's that guy's problem? Right? And when you told that beautiful story in a beautiful place in the south of France, that just struck me as being comfortable in your own skin. Right? Like you said.
Well, it's funny because I used to watch The Song of Bernadette, the movie about Lourdes, with my aunt many years ago. And so I said, I'm going to go there someday.
And isn't that a gift of recovery as well, Rebecca? Right? Not just talking about it, but actually putting in the legwork and going there.
I had to. I tell a lot of transgenders today when they say, well, this one talks about, I said, look, if what people say about you is your only problem in life, you're okay. Because they're going to talk about you. It's how you react to it. And it's painful at first, but then you grow you grow an identity. You have an identity. I never had an identity. Young girls put on their mother's clothes. That's a part of the process of growing. They put on their mother's high heels and lipstick and stuff. That's a part of growing up. That forms your identity. A young boy, he bonds with his father, plays baseball, with trucks, whatever, that forms an identity. With the transgender, when they're born and they're at 3 years old, they say, I'm a girl, and they're told they're a boy, and you say, no, I'm not a boy, I'm a girl. You have this deep-rooted feeling that you know what you are. And that was the hardest part for me, was trying to get an identity. I didn't know who I was. I had no clue who Rebecca really was. And so that was all the process of gaining my identity. And all the GISST work I did was like going back to school. I was learning a lot of stuff as I was doing it because transgenders were coming in. I was learning about their stories, about their struggles. And it was really awakening time for me.
So one of the things that strikes me about that, and particularly when you're talking about youth, right, and transgender youth, or any LGBTQ plus member, right, that often, but especially for transgender, you're taught from an early age not to trust your inner knowing, right? Like you're taught not to trust yourself. Like, this isn't, even if you don't know exactly, something's different. I'm not what you say I am, but you keep telling me, even if it's not purposeful, right? It's just, part of upbringing, even if you have a really accepting family, which many do not, right? But you're told constantly that, no, this is who you are. how you feel is wrong.
They were telling me this is who I'm supposed to be, this is who I'm supposed to feel, and this is how I'm supposed to act. And I went against everything.
And the groundedness,
school, because they back then they called it a juvenile delinquent, I think.
Yeah.
And so, so I was just putting mental hospitals and everything. And I loved it because in a mental hospital, that, you could dress up, you were expected to do that, right? So I loved it there. And
I love that positive perspective.
I always made something work for me. And so then I kept running away from home and hanging out in Park Square. So they sent me to Lyman School. That was an interesting place. And yeah. So it was a lot.
So Rebecca, they sent you to Lyman School. Would that be in Westboro?
Yes.
So that is actually...
I was in Oak Cottage, Overlook, which was, I believe, the disciplinary cottage.
Oh. So that's
where
I am
like
right
this
now.
all day long. Huh?
That's where I am right now. So the former site of the Lyman School for Boys is, and has been for many decades, Spectrum Health Systems inpatient campus.
Yeah.
So there's yet another connection. And I'd love to hear about where you're podcasting from right now in Lynn.
I'm at the Recovery Center in Lynn with all these lovely ladies here. And I may be starting a support group for transgenders here.
Oh, fantastic.
We can talk if it's okay.
We can absolutely talk, right?
Okay.
This is one of the things that Jesse and I often talk about is these podcasts share wonderful stories, but it also builds so much connection, not just to those that are listening, but for Spectrum, New England Recovery Center, myself and Jesse specifically, right? So we've started family support groups based on having Maureen Cavanaugh on the podcast twice that continues to run to this day. We've built connections and so it's really, the recovery community is so connected, and this is one of our opportunities to find those connections. So absolutely, we can talk more about having a transgender support group. That I co-chair Spectrum's Gender Responsiveness Committee. Really just working on how can we continue both for our staff and for our patients, clients, residents, across our systems in correctional settings, which sometimes can be very challenging, in outpatient and inpatient. How can we move from being welcoming to affirming, right? Because there's a difference there. You can, yes. And I think the recovery community often will have the impression, well, we're welcoming to all, we accept all. But there's a big difference between saying, yeah, you're welcome to be here, to us affirming who you are, right? And
yes.
And really, respecting that and having that included in the conversation and treatment services.
Absolutely.
And that's what I love.
Yeah, I just wanted to say real quick, because I don't want to forget to say it. So when we were talking about, all the challenges you've had kind of throughout your life, with all of the barriers and stigma and all of the things that you've had to fight really strongly against, when I talk to you now, and even though you're in Lynn, I'm in Central Mass, right? I get this overwhelming sense of groundedness from you, right? That I think only comes from those experiences, right? And so what I often will say is that the best people that I ever meet are often in long-term recovery. And I think you've got the added layer of all of the challenges you've had to go through, right?
I told you it was colorful, yeah.
And it allows you to really spend the time to understand yourself, to always come from that space of kind of self-affirmation. And so many of us that haven't gone through those experiences, right, that aren't in long-term recovery, that might kind of fit the typical cisgender, mold, really often don't have that opportunity, right? So you could, I could go through my whole life completely unexamined, right? And not have that groundedness, kind of about me, and continue throughout my entire life searching for others' approval, as Jesse said. And, it's a hard road, but wow, what a gift that you have now to be able to
Well,
stand
I'm content. I'm content. And I've never felt this way before. I remember as a kid, I grew up in Dorchester on Bowdoin Street. I remember as a kid, there was this man across the street, and he used to come out about 10 o'clock every night in his robe with his dog for a last little pee for his dog and go upstairs. And I used to think, because my family was so chaotic, and I used to think, wow, I want that. It was such a sense of security. Him coming down with his robe, just walking his dog and going back. I wanted that normalcy so bad all my life, and I never had it. And so it was very important for me to try to find that and duplicate that. And I think of that every time I go downstairs with my dogs. I have my robe on. I think of that man.
You
Isn't that
have
funny?
it. And I love that you incorporated the robe. Like that is your like process. I love that.
And that's another example of a thought or a situation in recovery coming to fruition, right? You had this experience growing up. You looked at this as a barometer of sorts of stability. And now, all these years later, you are that barometer, maybe for somebody else that we don't even know is watching.
I hope so. I really do. I hope so. If anything, if I could help somebody, that would be great. I've always thought that way. I'm a Pisces, so I'm a giver. And I've always thought that way, Jesse. If I could help somebody, because it's so devastating, and transgenders, I think, is so special, they're just so misunderstood. And I think we're misunderstood. We misunderstand ourselves.
Yeah.
That's why we're open to substance abuse and prostitution and all those bad things. We never know what good really is, what it is to live, not normal. Nobody should live normal. I'm far from normal. But live a life without fear, without having to worry about where you're going to get your next meal. Mm-hmm. Or where you're going to get, your next drink.
Yeah.
Because that's what I did. I became a coke whore in the city of Chelsea, walking the streets of Chelsea. It was terrible. When I think back of it, I go, wow. But I have to remember it because I remember trying to kill myself and having these scars. But this is a reminder. Yeah. Just keeps me grounded.
Yeah.
All those things that come into my head, and I don't live by them or dwell on them by any means, but they keep me grounded.
And Lisa mentioned something, I think that ties into what you just said, Rebecca, and thank you for sharing that. So often you're misunderstood, or transgenders are misunderstood. And I heard you say that, a transgendered person could misunderstand themselves. And it goes back to something Lisa touched on, I believe, that sense of identity at a young age, being told that you're something you're not, or having a conflict between what you feel and what other people say.
Right.
So it's only logical as an adult, like you said, you're open to substance abuse, you're open to prostitution, you're open to taking all these risks that maybe somebody else that feels more understood would not be taken.
Exactly. But I look at everything as a school, as a learning process now. I'm glad I can do that. I looked even at Filene's working there with the people. I looked at my life like, okay, the first 35 years or whatever were horrible, but I learned from that about life, about myself. And then the next part was the social part. I had to learn how to react to people and deal with people. I mean, I was a county manager. I had to deal with people in a responsible way, in a very good way, without scaring them or without being nervous myself and having a panic attack, because I did have a couple. But it opened up doors for me, and I met people that are still my friends today.
Wow.
So.
One of the things you talked a little bit about that I think really ties to kind of some of the work you've done is the need for education. And so, part of your history is founding the Transgender Education Network to, provide training in across the state and in communities and do workshops and talk about what are the health concerns and what does this look like. And we talked a little bit for the podcast about kind of training providers on how to support the transgender community. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what that work was and why it's so important?
Well, a lot of it was DPH supported that because they knew that especially the AIDS Bureau, Substance Abuse Bureau, they knew that there were a lot of providers that were not serving the transgender community. And more important, there were a lot of transgenders that had fear of going to these providers. We got our hormones from the streets.
Yeah.
Everything we needed, we got ourselves. I never went to a doctor, ever, unless it was absolutely, and then I flew out of there. I had one doctor say to me, "I'll pray for you." Can you believe that? She said, "I'll pray for you." I said, "I don't need your prayers."
Right.
But this is how it was like. So the training, the outreach was so important. So the Transgender Education Network 10 was just that. We had started the first New England Transgender Health Conference. I had contacted everybody in all the New England states. And I said, "Can I trust you with getting this literature out?" And so, DPH is true in every state. DPH gave me the people to call. So over 300 people came to the first conference at the Heinz in Boston. And to get to what you were saying about everybody can say you look great and that one person, I had evaluations at the end of the conference, and everybody, what a wonderful conference. I learned so much about transgenders. I see them so differently now. And then there's that one that said, "Well, you could have done this and you could have done that." So, but the education piece was the most important. That was the 10 project, and going out to Fenway Community Health, to where else did I go? I went to what's that place in Cambridge? It begins with an L. Not Leahy. Is it Leahy?
Might be Leahy. Yeah.
Yeah, I did a training there. All over, and then I went to the State House. Knocked on everybody's door. I went to Kennedy's office, Bobby Kennedy, and of course they didn't want to meet with me. They had their right-hand person meet with me. So I'm sitting in the right-hand person's office, and they have all pictures of Kennedy, Joe Kennedy, and a few of them he's in drag at a party or something, making fun of it, and I just was like, "Oh no." But I got the support letters. So when we put in for our money, I had all those support letters right there.
That's just, that's just unbelievable. Like what one person can do to start to build that. And, and Fenway now is known for supporting the transgender community, right? Like, so you start with that original education and you start to educate and then it grows from there. Right now, people can gravitate towards Fenway for that work.
And the timing was right.
Yeah.
The timing was right for it. People were ready to hear it. At least in Boston, the providers, they were ready. It was time. So, you're at the right place, the right time. And
yeah,
that education still needed. From what I hear often is that if you're in Boston or willing to travel to Boston, then there's services available. But then you come out to Central Mass, Western Mass, right? Further out down the Cape, like it's more.
Well, me, I'm not going to Boston anymore. I'm going to Leahy and Salem because it's too far.
Right. And we still need, like, all the great work that you've done, it's still needed, right? Like doing education across our healthcare systems, across the state, across the country it's still such a need out there.
Yeah. And I had everything I have ever done. I've always had the transgender community involved in it, whether it was trainings, whatever it was. I always invited the community in. And the trainings we did was really very important. It talked about the medical issues of transgenders, especially for female to male, because it's always easier to take off than to add on, if you know what I mean. So, the medical issues were much more profound with female to male transgenders than male to female, but substance abuse and HIV were higher in the male to female category. So,
yeah. And, it just speaks to kind of what is often said in the recovery community, particularly in the recovery centers and other spaces, right? Is that bringing in the transgender community part of those conversations, nothing about us without us, right? So this shouldn't be a conversation that's happening over here with medical and clinical people and not the transgender community,
exactly.
right?
Exactly. They had to be, front and center. Yeah.
And I think we still have work to do for that in the transgender community, even in the recovery community. Like, we're still fighting for, we're adding recovery centers. Lynn just opened. I'm so excited that
I know. Isn't it great?
And we're doing a lot more of that, but we really have to still work to make sure that those with their own lived experience in all spaces have a seat at the table, right? And not just
you can't rest on your laurels with this, because I remember saying to somebody at JRI Health one time, Stephen Turney, he was a part of the gay movement, he was an activist. And I said, it must be nice to see, the gay community come up. He said, it is, Rebecca. He said, but never sit down for a moment, because it can go back to the way it was like that. And it's proven with other states and stuff.
Oh, yeah. The political climate now certainly, unfortunately, shows that.
I've never seen them go after transgenders. We were always under the radar, kind of, we came out at night.
Yeah. And I really believe it's not about you. It's about politics, but it's hard for the general community to see that.
And I loved what you said, Rebecca, about, you always invited the community. And saying, I think it's a proverb of some sort I heard recently was, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
That's it.
So there's no doubt in my mind, just for meeting you today, that this fiery person from Dorchester can, make waves and certainly talk to people. You talk about going to the Kennedy's office in the State House. However, it strikes me as, even with that extroverted personality, you knew that, hey, we need to do this together. And that's a beautiful recovery mindset, that together we can.
Yes. We have to teach. We have to educate.
And also,
all about
another of the million reasons why I love Spectrum is that, like Lisa talked about, you never know what's going to happen on the podcast and what it can turn into. You just mentioned, you guys will talk later about a support group at our new Lynn Peer Recovery Center. I'm reminded of last year's Pride episode that we did with a transgendered person in long-term recovery, Beck G. Cohen, who started a company-wide training, I believe 2 of them, where, just off of the discussion that we've had today, Rebecca, where, we still need so much education. We still need to be equipped with information and get it out system-wide. And, it's one thing to talk about it. It's also another thing to put that into practical application. And I remember
that's
sitting
what I'm
there,
about, practical application. I don't like to leave things hanging, because there's always something else you have to do. And so I like to get rid, just get it done and go on to the next thing.
Yeah. All right. So I think the first transgender support group should be next week.
Here I'm not. Huh?
Right. Let's just start the support group now, right? And as an organization, we can't rest on our laurels either, right? We did so we really believe, that we did do a company-wide training, right? And so that was back office billing staff, administrative, clinical, physicians, straight through to our CEO, right? Like, everybody attended. And I think that was really important for us. It sent a message as an organization to our staff that this is important to us as an organization, and we need to be affirming, and we need to make sure that we've put the correct information out there for folks. And we've done clinical trainings kind of after that, but we need to keep having that conversation. Like, we need to keep discussing it. Staff will change. The culture can change easily when staff changes.
Just the whole services have changed within the substance abuse community. I mean, we no longer have those long-term treatment centers. I was one of the last ones to get a 30-day at a place called Stair in Milton, and they never had a transgender. So I was like kind of the first with everything, and so I stayed there for a month, and it was tough.
So selfishly, I would love to ask how addiction treatment providers can do better. And so is there anything that you would suggest to an addiction treatment provider who's running, we run multiple levels of care, outpatient medication for addiction treatment, inpatient detox where Jesse's sitting right now, right? Withdrawal management, clinical stabilization beds. And we do have some long-term residential beds. Like what are the things that from your perspective we can do, right, to be more open, welcoming, affirming, right, for the transgender community? Like what are the things that we can do to be better?
Well, I just think being honesty is like the key, because we can see through people. So honesty is really like, I don't know what you're going through because I'm not transgender, but I want you to know you're welcome here, and we're going to do everything you can to help you. And I hope you educate us on what your needs are and how we can help you.
That's great.
I like that. Honesty is important.
It's just very simple. It's a very simple thing. You don't have to go way out of your way to do things. I think just honesty and acceptance and welcoming means a lot.
Yeah.
And not being afraid to have those conversations, right?
And not being afraid to have those conversations. And that's where trainings come in for the providers.
Mm-hmm. We've done some training, including for more often for outpatient because it's a longer term, support for folks. But how do we help our clinicians writing letters, right, to support gender affirming surgery? Like what needs to go in that letter? How can we support them? What does that need to look like, right? Like even practical supports, right? Now, of course, there's like the being welcoming in therapy and in treatment programming and all of those things. But then there's life.
Yeah. And then how do you pay your rent? How do you dress yourself? How do you do that? Once you get out of treatment or wherever, you feel terrific. You're faced with the same problems out there. Yeah, it's tough. I was so lucky, though. I had a sponsor that took me right to Plymouth.
Good. And it goes back to what you said about practical application, right? We talk about this and then we put it into action. And I loved what you said that you looked at everything as school. I think there's a commercial out there somewhere with my face on it that talks about my experience as a client here. And I called it Recovery College because that's really what it was. It was teaching me how to function as an adult without self-medicating and learning from that experience.
Exactly. And that's the best you can do for yourself is if you put your mindset as, I'm going to look at this as an education to myself. And really, because I didn't know what sobriety looked like. I mean, I told you I started drinking later in age, but I didn't socialize with people like you, with normal people. My thing was going out to the clubs, looking good, and then making money. And so I'm getting old. I've lost my train of thought. So what were we talking about?
We're talking about Recovery College and taking everything as an education.
Oh yeah. So that's what I had to do. I had to think of it like a school and learn everything I possibly could about recovery and addiction, and then apply it to myself. Because I'm not like you or you. I'm transgender, so I had to apply it many different ways, and sometimes that didn't work, and I had to do something else.
Which is why we, particularly in the recovery center, all pathways, right? All pathways to recovery.
And I tell people who fall off the wagon, who relapse, there's a reason why you did that. So you're stronger today because of it. Every relapse you go through, you have to go through to make you stronger. So you don't want to do it again.
Yeah.
You just can't stop. It's not us, So it took a while for me.
Yeah. I like to say you're not starting over, you're starting from experience. It's not like you forget all those lessons that if you look at something like school and then you have a return to use, well, you still have that experience. So you're that much, like you said, stronger and better for it.
Right.
So we're coming up on the kind of end of our time, and I just can't thank you enough for joining us, Rebecca. Thank you for sharing your story for being so vulnerable, and really for kind of sharing your strength and sharing your groundedness with all of us and your knowledge. And it's really a gift for us this Pride Month, and a reminder that we can't stop, right? Just because June ends does not mean that we need to stop this conversation, does not mean that we need to stop this education.
Exactly. And I tell transgenders, you will get a job. It will get better. It got better for me. It will get better. If you do the right thing, it'll get better.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a gift. We really appreciate you, and we will have a follow-up conversation. In fact, one of my calls today will be to Athena to talk about how we can support that transgender support group in Lynn.
That would be great.
And folks, if you're local and listening, please stop by the Lynn Recovery Center on Exchange Street. It has been named the Recovery Exchange. It's a great spot, or any one of our peer recovery support centers, or your local peer recovery support center, connect with the recovery community and get to know, folks. It's really worth it. So thank you so much. This has been a gift. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's so nice. Thank you, Jesse. Nice meeting you.
It was a pleasure speaking with you, Rebecca. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And if you like more of this, subscribe, find us wherever you listen to podcasts, and look forward to talking to you next time.
Good job.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks. Bye.